Long ago, on the distant alien planet Zorthan, there stood a sword unlike any other. It was buried deep inside a black stone at the top of a hill called Graven's Peak. The sword had no name, but everyone called it the Unliftable Blade. The legend said it was made by the gods themselves, created not just as a weapon, but as a test. A test no one could pass. For over 1,000 years, alien warriors came from every corner of the galaxy to try. Massive creatures with 4 arms, telekinetic. Beings with giant minds, creatures made of fire and shadow, they all tried. But none could move the sword even an inch. Many died trying. Some went mad. Some never returned. The sword remained untouched. The stone it was buried in glowed with a faint blue light. Around it stood statues of the greatest champions of Zorthan, all frozen in time as if guarding the weapon. Some believed they were not statues, but the last ones who touched the sword and turned to stone. A curse, they said. Others thought it was just the planet's way of protecting something sacred. The hill became a holy place. Alien priests called it the place of testing. Only the bravest were allowed to go near it. Entire pilgrimages were made just to watch someone try and fail. It became a sport, a ritual, and for some an obsession. But no one ever succeeded. One day, a small spacecraft landed near Graven's Peak. It wasn't big or shiny. It looked old, patched, and barely working. From it stepped a man not tall, not strong, not glowing with power, just a human. His name was Jason Crew. Jason was alone, no fanfare, no army. Just him and his worn-out gear. The local aliens laughed when they saw him. Another fool, they said. This one doesn't even have claws. The guards at the base of the hill tried to stop him. Only warriors can pass, they warned. This is no place for a weak human, but Jason only smiled. I'm just here to see it, he said calmly. That's all. The priests allowed him through. Maybe they wanted to see him fail. Maybe they thought his death would bring more attention. Either way, they didn't expect what would come next. As Jason climbed the hill, the crowd watched in silence. No one cheered. No one believed. He reached the top and stood before the sword. It was massive, its hilt almost as tall as him. The blade itself was still buried deep inside the glowing black stone. The carvings around it were written in an old alien script, long forgotten. But Jason paused. He stared at the symbols like he understood them. He knelt in front of the sword and placed his hand gently on the stone. Something pulsed. It was faint, like a heartbeat in the rock. No one else noticed. Only Jason felt it. He didn't try to pull the sword, not yet. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered something. Words in a language no one recognized. The wind shifted. The blue glow of the stone flickered, just for a moment. Down below, one of the statues cracked. The priests leaned forward. Did you see that? One of them whispered. Jason stood up, looked around the valley, and then placed both hands on the sword's handle. Everyone held their breath, but Jason didn't pull. Not yet. He turned to the crowd and said, "It's not about strength." Then he gripped the sword, and the ground trembled. It didn't rise from the stone. Not yet. But something had changed. The wind howled. The glowing light from the stone turned red, then green, then silver. The sky above darkened. Clouds circling above the peak. Lightning cracked in the distance. Animals nearby ran. Some of the alien guards stepped back in fear. Jason let go. He walked down the hill slowly. Everyone stared. "You didn't pull it." One alien shouted. Jason didn't answer. He returned to his ship and sat quietly. Later that night, the statue that cracked, fully shattered, and the sword began to hum. The legend had waited for centuries. But now, something was waking, and it had noticed the human. The next morning, Graven's Peak was filled with noise. Hundreds of aliens gathered, whispering, pointing, and laughing about the strange human who dared to touch the ancient sword. He didn't even try to pull it out," said a tall, insect-like warrior. "He just stared at it like a lost child." Another shouted. The rumors spread quickly across the planet. Holo News channels showed Jason's face on every screen. The silent human, they called him, the weakest challenger ever. Memes of him looking confused near the sword flooded alien social media. Children mocked him in the streets. Merchants sold dolls of Jason bowing to the sword, pretending to cry, but Jason said nothing. He stayed near his ship, fixing its damaged parts, sitting under the twin suns and watching the sword from afar. While others laughed, one alien did not. Her name was Lyrava, a quiet female of the Talari race, known for their psychic abilities and long lifespans. Lyrava had watched Jason very closely. She had seen the energy ripple through the stone. She had felt the moment the statue cracked. And she had heard the whisper Jason spoke before touching the sword. It wasn't a random sound. It was an ancient Talari word, a word lost for over 900 years. She approached the hill quietly that evening, alone, and stood near Jason's ship. "You said something." She spoke gently. Jason looked up. "I say a lot of things," he replied with a soft smile. Lyrava didn't smile. "You spoke the word of beginning. Only our oldest elders remember that word." Jason paused. "I heard it in a dream," he said. That answer made her tremble. "Dreams like that don't come for free. Something is calling you." Jason looked at the sword on the hill. "I think it's testing me." Lyrava nodded. "Then you must be careful. Because the sword is not only watching you, others are watching too." Down in the city below, inside a dark chamber, alien generals from 5 different species held a secret meeting. Their faces were angry. Their voices were sharp. "That human did something. We don't know what yet," growled one general with a metal jaw. The sword glowed. A statue cracked. "This is not coincidence," hissed a cloaked lizard being. "We must stop him before he tries again," said a large rock-skinned warlord. "If a human lifts the sword, we lose everything. Our legends, our control, our power," they all agreed. The sword was more than a symbol, it was a weapon. And whoever lifted it would gain command over ancient machines, locked away for eons. The sword was a key, and they could not let a human hold it. Back at Graven's Peak, the crowd returned the next day, expecting another joke. "Maybe he'll trip over the sword this time." Someone laughed, but Jason didn't go near the sword. Instead, he was drawing something on the sand, the same symbols carved around the sword's stone. He was writing them from memory. Lyrava watched from a distance. She was no longer curious, she was worried. The symbols Jason wrote were perfect. He shouldn't know them. He shouldn't understand them. Yet he did. Suddenly, a loud voice echoed. Across the valley, a large alien stepped forward, General Thorgas of the Craner Empire. He pointed at Jason. "You have shamed the sacred ground. Human. You have no right to be here." Jason stood slowly. "I didn't break anything," Thorgas sneered. "You woke something. You dared to speak forgotten words. You bring danger." Jason tilted his head. "Maybe danger needs to be woken." Gasps filled the crowd. Thorgas stepped closer. "Leave this world, or we will remove you." Jason smiled faintly. "Try." The wind changed again. The sword glowed brighter than before. The crowd went silent. Even Thorgas paused. Something was coming, and Jason was no longer just a joke. Jason sat alone under the stars that night, his eyes fixed on the ancient sword glowing faintly in the distance. His hand moved slowly over the strange symbols he had drawn in the sand earlier. They shimmered faintly, now glowing not with light, but with memory. Wasn't his dot far above the planet Zorthan? A satellite silently watched. It wasn't alien. It wasn't human. It was something older, built by an extinct race known only in whispers as the Aliari. Inside the satellite, an ancient protocol activated. Signal matched. Human carrier detected. Sequence initiated. Memory restoration beginning. Jason's head jerked back. He gritted his teeth. His vision blurred. Then it began. He was no longer sitting on Zorthan. He stood inside a white room with silver walls. Symbols danced in the air. A woman, tall, glowing, with pale golden skin, stood before him. "You are not ready," she said gently. "I don't understand," Jason replied. "You are a receiver, not the source," she whispered. "You were chosen not by birth, but by memory." The room exploded in light. Jason gasped. Back on Zorthan, sweat on his face. Lyrava ran to him. "What happened?" Jason looked at his hands. "I saw a woman. She said I was chosen, but I don't know who she was." Lyrava frowned. "Chosen by who?" Jason stood up slowly. "Not a person. A memory. A memory so old it needed someone to carry it. Somehow, that's me." Lyrava took a step back. "You are a living key." Jason turned toward the sword. "I think the sword knew me before I was born." Far below, in a government bunker on Earth, alarms rang out. Zorthan anomaly detected. Human DNA match. Subject, Jason Crew. Activate sleeper files. He was never supposed to return. Back on Earth, Jason's old school record was erased. His military file deleted. His family photos vanished from public networks. Someone had tried to erase him, but the sword had remembered. Jason's childhood had always been strange. He never got sick. Machines responded to him. He once touched an alien artifact in a museum, and it lit up for him, and no one else. Scientists called him a bio-anomaly. Governments called him top priority. But after some tests, they let him go. Nothing special, they had concluded. But Jason remembered more. When he was 12, he had dreams of a burning sky, ships made of light, and voices calling him protector. He never told anyone. Not even his parents. Now standing near Graven's peak, he realized those dreams were not imagination. They were old instructions. Back on Zorthan, the alien generals met again. He's connected to the Eliari tech. "It's waking up," said a slim purple-skinned being. "We need to destroy him before he touches the sword again," said another. "But what if the sword chooses him?" asked one quietly. "Then we are already too late," whispered the oldest. Among them, Lyrava and Jason sat beside a small fire. The stars above shimmered, and a soft wind blew through the valley. Lyrava spoke carefully. "There are stories among my people, ancient ones, of a race that seeded protectors on different worlds. They said these protectors would carry memories not their own, but of a dying civilization." Jason stared into the fire. "And I'm one of them?" She nodded. "You were never normal, were you?" Jason chuckled softly. "No, I guess not." Suddenly, the ground shook. The sword glowed bright silver dot, and then a second sword appeared next to it, rising from the ground like mist becoming metal. Everyone saw it. Everyone screamed. Jason stood slowly. The sword wasn't waiting for someone strong. He looked at the second blade. It was waiting for someone remembered. Asterisk. The twin moons of Zorthan glowed high above as the second sword finished rising from the ground. This blade was thinner, smoother, with a faint green shimmer that looked like living crystal. The moment it appeared, the first sword, the one buried in the stone, glowed brighter. Like both blades were calling to each other after centuries apart. The crowd stood frozen. No one knew what to say. No one had ever seen two swords. There was no record, no scroll, no priest alive who had even imagined this could happen. Except Jason. He didn't look surprised. Lyrava whispered, "This changes everything." Jason nodded. "It was never about one sword. It's a pair. They were waiting for each other." Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the valley. The ground near the swords cracked open. Dust exploded into the air. The statues surrounding the swords began to move, slowly, like stone giants waking from a long Dream! Gasps and screams echoed across the cliffs. It's the curse! Someone yelled. The statues are alive. One by one, the ancient warrior. Statues stepped down from their stone platforms, huge, armored figures 10 feet tall. Their eyes glowed with light, each a different color. They didn't speak. They didn't attack. They knelt. Not to the swords. But to Jason. Lyrava's knees weakened. They're not statues. They're guardians, preserved by time. Waiting. For the true wielder. Jason looked at them calmly. They're not kneeling to me. They're kneeling to the memory I carry. The swords pulsed again, brighter than ever. Then, without warning, one of the guardians turned. It let out a sharp, echoing growl and raised a massive fist. From the shadows near the hill, a group of armored alien soldiers had started to charge forward. They were sent by the council secretly to kill Jason before the sword chose him completely. But they were too late. The guardians moved like lightning. With loud, thunderous steps, 2 guardians blocked the soldiers. A wall of living stone and ancient armor. The alien attackers opened fire, lasers slicing through the night. The beams hit the guardians and did nothing. The energy weapons melted harmlessly across their bodies. Then the guardians struck back. One slammed the ground with a glowing hammer. The earth cracked. Soldiers flew backward, screaming. Another guardian spun and knocked 3 attackers into the cliff wall with one swing of its blade. Jason didn't flinch. He stepped between the guardians and raised a single hand. Stop, he said. All the guardians froze. The attackers did too, even. The air felt still. Jason walked up to the leader of the attack group, who was on his knees shaking. Jason looked him in the eyes. This planet has waited long enough. You cannot stop what's coming. He turned to the second sword. Everyone held their breath. Jason stepped toward the blade that had risen for him. It didn't sit in stone. It floated slightly above the ground. Waiting. He reached out, and this time, he touched it. There was no resistance. No shaking. No test. The sword simply moved into his hand like it belonged there. A long, clear tone rang out across the hills. The first sword, still in the black stone, responded. It glowed a bright blue. Then something even stranger happened. The stone melted. The unliftable sword, buried for over 1,000 years, slowly rose on its own and floated beside Jason. He now held one sword, and the second hovered near his shoulder like a companion. Both swords pulsed together. Lyrava whispered, "He has awakened the Guardian Protocol." Jason looked at her. "This planet isn't just hiding weapons. It's hiding a war." She swallowed hard. Then, "Who is the enemy?" Jason looked at the stars. And for the first time he looked afraid. "I don't know, but they're coming. And these swords, they're not just for me. They're for all of us." Far above Zorthan, in a dark corner of the galaxy, something woke in response. Eyes opened. Ships powered on. A signal set long ago finally reached its target. The enemy was no longer asleep, and now they knew the swords had chosen their wielder, a human. A strange silence covered Graven's peak. The air was still. Even the wind had stopped moving. Jason stood in the center of it all, holding one sword while the other floated beside him like a loyal spirit. Both blades pulsed with a soft light, one blue, one green. The guardians stood like statues once again, not out of sleep, but in respect. The crowd had stopped laughing. There was no more mocking, only wide eyes and held breaths. Then, a voice filled the sky, but it didn't come from a person. It came from the swords. Identity confirmed. Bloodline matched. Protocol active. Wielder accepted. Initializing. Name sequence. Jason stepped back as a symbol appeared in the sky, burning across the clouds in golden light. It was not a name written in letters. It was a symbol older than language itself. Jason blinked. The meaning appeared in his mind. "I am Veritas." The sword had named itself. The aliens gasped. Veritas was a forbidden word spoken only in old myths. It meant truth that cannot be bent. The sword was not just a weapon. It was a judge. Suddenly, the floating blade beside Jason began to spin gently, rising higher into the air. Then it sliced downward toward the black stone, cutting deep into the earth with no sound, only light. The stone, once called unbreakable, cracked open. Inside was not just rock. It was a vault. And inside that vault were more weapons, more secrets, more memories, but none of them woke up. Not until Jason stepped forward. As Jason moved toward the vault, lines of ancient energy flowed beneath his feet like veins of silver light. The mountain trembled slightly, and a door appeared, glowing with the same symbols Jason had once seen only in his dreams. He placed his hand on it. Access granted. The door slid open with a slow hum. Inside was not darkness. It was a chamber full of light and floating shapes, maps, codes, weapons, armor pieces, and what looked like a cryogenic pod in the very center. Jason walked in alone. Everyone outside waited. No one dared follow. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, the mountain glowed from within, as if the whole hill was a machine waking up after sleeping for ages. Jason walked out slowly, but he wasn't the same. He now wore strange armor that shimmered between metal and light. It moved like it was alive, adjusting perfectly to his body. The two swords floated on either side of him, and on his chest glowed a single word: Protector. Lyrava stepped forward, tears in her eyes. It's you. You were never just chosen. You were created for this. Jason looked around at the crowd. This planet wasn't hiding a weapon, he said. It was hiding a warning. Everyone stared. Jason raised his hand, and the floating sword Veritas hovered before him. I'm not here to rule, he said. I'm here to defend. Then, in the far distance, a strange noise echoed across the sky. Boom, boom. Flashes of light blinked far beyond the horizon. Lyrava gasped. Those aren't storms. Jason narrowed his eyes. They've arrived. Up in orbit, massive black ships the size of cities dropped out of hyperspace. They were silent. No signal, no words. Just motion. Old, angular, and covered in strange marking symbols Jason had seen only once before. Deep in the vault. The same enemy that destroyed the Eliari. They had come back, and now they knew the sword had chosen again. Back on the ground, the alien generals who once laughed at Jason were now scrambling. Prepare our fleets, they shouted. Ready the defenses. But Lyrava whispered, it's too late for war. If we don't follow him. Jason looked at the sky, and then at the people gathered below. I'm not your king, he said. I'm just a human, but I carry their memory. And I'll fight for all of us. The swords glowed. The guardians moved again. The vault behind him fully opened, and Zorthan began to wake. Jason stood silently at the entrance of the vault, his armor glowing softly, the swords hovering like loyal sentries. Behind him, the guardians waited. Around him, the aliens of Zorthan stood still, confused, and afraid. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, Jason did something strange. He turned his back on the crowd and walked into the vault again. This time alone, deeper than before. The vault's second chamber was vast, larger than a city, buried beneath the mountain. Its walls were covered in carvings, moving carvings that shimmered with light and shifted like liquid glass. They told a story, a history no one alive remembered. Jason stood before them, and the swords began to whisper, you are ready now. You carry the memory. Remember what they tried to erase. Suddenly, Jason's mind filled with images, not dreams, but memories passed down by the Eliari. He saw galaxies burning, stars collapsing, and a race of shadow-like beings with no name, no voice, and no mercy. These creatures weren't aliens. They were something else. Something built to consume civilizations. They were called the Hollow. Thousands of years ago, The Ilyari created weapons not to conquer, but to defend. Veritas and its twin blade, Lunaris, were the first of their kind. Each sword wasn't just metal and light, they held the will of ancient warriors. A will that could bond with a memory carrier. A living key. Jason was that key. Not by blood, not by destiny, but because humanity was unnoticed, a forgotten branch of Ilyari experiments left behind before the war. And now, Jason was the first to unlock the vault because his species was still invisible to the hollow. Until now. Outside, the sky had changed. Dark lines began to crawl across the atmosphere. Like cracks in glass. Ships of the hollow pierced through, silent and massive. They did not speak. They only advanced. Zorthan's armies powered up their shields. Fighters flew into the sky. Weapons locked on. And Jason walked out of the vault. Calm as ever, he looked at Lyriva. They feed on fear and confusion. They destroy identity. That's why the swords choose those who carry memory, because memory fights forgetting. Lyriva blinked. What do they want? Jason looked at the sky. Everything that breathes. The alien generals gathered around him now, no longer arrogant. What do we do, human? One asked. Jason answered simply, unite or vanish. He reached into his armor and pulled out a small silver cube taken from the vault. When he pressed it, the ground trembled again. New shapes rose from beneath the planet towers, machines, and sky pillars long buried. The guardians took positions, the swords glowed, and above, the enemy drew closer. Far above, aboard the lead hollow ship, something shifted. A shadowy figure moved slowly through a chamber, filled with broken pieces of conquered worlds. It stopped before a large screen showing Jason Crew's face. 1,000 eyes opened. The voice was not a sound, it was a feeling. He carries the sword, he carries the memory, end him. Back on the ground, Jason turned toward the crowd. I'm not here to win. I'm here to hold the line until we remember who we were meant to be. He raised the sword Veritas high into the air. Its light sliced through the clouds. And for the first time in centuries, the ancient defense system of Zorthan activated a world engine, created to protect not just one planet, but 10. The hollow ships stopped. They had noticed something they hadn't seen. In eons colon resistance. Jason stepped forward. Let them come. His voice was calm, but his heart burned with a fire passed down through millennia. Because now he knew, the cause now he knew. Sword had not chosen him because he was special. It had chosen him because he would never give up. And the truth behind the sword wasn't power. It was hope. The skies over Zorthan were no longer silent. Black ships of the hollow hovered above the atmosphere, each one larger than a mountain, casting shadows over the cities below. They had no symbols, no lights, only a heavy, crushing darkness that swallowed sound. But on the ground, something brighter had awakened. Jason stood at the peak of the ancient vault, now fully uncovered. Around him, alien guardians formed a protective ring. Behind him, the twin swords Veritas and Lunaris hovered, like celestial wings. His armor shimmered with silver energy, alive with memory and meaning. Every eye on the planet, every camera, every being, alien or not, watched him. The alien generals, once proud and divided, now stood side by side. The priesthood bowed. Children pointed and whispered, "The human, he speaks for the sword." Jason raised his hand, and the swords rose with him. This is no longer about planets. This is no longer about species. This is about the future of memory itself. The swords spoke, not with sound, but with clarity of thought that entered every living mind. You have forgotten who you are. But he remembers, and that is enough. Above them, the hollow ships began to descend. Their hulls cracked open, revealing their terrible truth. Inside were the ruins of worlds they had eaten. Buildings, bones, and shattered stars merged into their flesh. They didn't conquer for power. They conquered to erase. To delete history. To end story. Jason looked up, unshaken. I won't let them take your stories, he said to the crowd. Then he stepped forward. The swords flared to life, one with silver fire, the other with green lightning. And behind him, the guardians marched. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the generals, once his enemy, stepped beside him. Then Lyrava, her hand glowing with psychic light, stood on his other side. Then, more joined, not because they were ordered to, because they chose to. Jason smiled. Good, he whispered. Now we fight as one. The battle began. The Hollow fired black beams that erased everything in their path. But Zorthan's ancient defense towers shot golden arcs that bent reality, blocking the attacks. Guardians leaped into the air, crashing into Hollow drones with the fury of forgotten titans. And Jason flew. The armor responded to his will. The swords danced in his hands like extensions of his soul. He sliced through the darkness, not to kill, but to break the silence the Hollow brought. Every slash was a memory reborn. Every strike was a story saved. Hours passed like seconds. The Hollow's main ship descended, aiming for the vault. Jason landed on its hull and walked straight into its core. There, he found it, the source. A swirling sphere of empty white, feeding on lost names, lost worlds, lost love. Jason stood before it and whispered, "Not today." Then he drove both swords into it. A wave of blinding light erupted. Across space, across time, across galaxies, the Hollow screamed, but not with pain. With recognition. For the first time, they remembered something. A human. Back on Zorthan, the skies cleared, the ships of the Hollow turned gray and disappeared. The world was saved, but Jason was gone. Days later, Lyrva stood before a new statue. It showed Jason standing with the two swords, his head high, eyes calm. Below it, a simple line was carved. He wasn't born to lead. He chose to. And that made him more than chosen. It made him human. And across the stars, in the minds of many, stories began to rise again. Of a world that forgot, of a sword that remembered, and of a man who reminded everyone what it meant to fight, not with power but with purpose.